Gravity wants to bring us down, and we all fall down. Gravity describes the natural phenomenon that all physical bodies in the universe attract each other. All things on the earth have a smaller mass than the earth itself, and therefore gravity pulls objects towards the ground. Now, since we're all pulled toward the earth, in essence, we're all connected via gravity to one another by this pull. And because the earth is in relationship to the moon through gravity, we are connected to the moon. Because the earth is in relationship to the sun through gravity, we are connected to the sun. It's all quite incredible, really. It is because of gravity that we do not float off into space, and it is that very same gravity that is, in fact, the reason why we fall. So gravity is somewhat of a great equalizer. Now, I've always been a bit of a physics junkie. Physics has carried a sense of awe for me in a similar way that art and music and a good book and a good film do. And the beauty of physics is not only about the natural phenomenon that we can explain, it's also what we can create with that understanding. I'm awed that we, humanity, has figured out and then designed the structures and organized the people and carried out the plans that created water systems and sewer lines and electrical systems and roads and musical scales and all these systems that I had absolutely no part in but benefit from nearly every day. It's pretty amazing. And when you add our ability to work with and in spite of gravity, there's even more to be astounded by. We figured out how to launch a rocket into space, to build bridges that can bear the weight of traffic. We've built buildings as high as 163 floors. And the sheer fact that 76,000 airplanes take off and land daily in the United States alone with little incident, that's nearly a miracle. Not only because we managed to figure it out, but also because we are basing everything we do scientifically on approximations. And yet the science still works. Now, I want you to know that I'm very purposefully not going to go down this rabbit hole of explaining to you this morning why physics is full of approximations. But I highly recommend, even if you're slightly interested in this idea, a little book by K.C. Cole called The Universe and the Teacup. If you want to learn more about all of the leaps of faith in one of our most concrete and practical sciences. But this morning, I begin simply by celebrating humanity with a big wow. Human beings are pretty amazing. Now, how many of you had a chance to see the film Gravity before today? Good. For the rest of you, I'm about to spoil the movie for you. The film deserves its own wow. It is visually something to behold, a marvel of 3D film production and special effects. And if you're lucky enough to see it in one of those new lounge chairs that humanity created at a flat space, you'll be even more impressed. But the story also struck me in a way that I hadn't expected. And it took several days of pondering before it had its full impact on me. You see, in the film, Sandra Bullock plays Dr. Ryan Stone, a medical engineer on her first space shuttle mission aboard the Explorer. She's accompanied by veteran astronaut Matt Kowalski, who's played by George Clooney, who is commanding his final expedition. Now, the scale in the film of these two astronauts floating around in space next to an enormous, spinning, blue-green Earth creates an experience of the tension of proportion and vastness. As the filmmakers prompt us to relish in these gorgeous shots of the Earth from space, they are also encouraging us to have an experience of the paradox of our significance and our insignificance. As we're introduced to Dr. Stone, she's obviously focused exclusively on her work, on the task. So focused, in fact, that she must be prompted by Kowalski to take the view in which he is relishing for the last time. His character begs us to pay attention to every moment as though it were never going to happen again. Now, interestingly, Dr. Stone's name suits her character quite well, reminding us not only of her numbness to her own emotion at the beginning of the film, but her name also focuses on the weight of the stone which she carries with her. Her story, the burden of having put her young daughter in the grave, who we later learn fell playing tag and hit her head on a stone, a freak accident of falling, of gravity. Stone's name also hints at two key existential moments of malaise in literature related to stones, which mirror Dr. Stone's discomfort in space. The first is Sisyphus, a figure of Greek mythology who was condemned to repeat forever the same meaningless task of pushing a boulder up a mountain only to see it roll all the way back down again and to have to start all over. It's a very famous story that was made famous by existentialist author Albert Camus. Now, in Camus' description of life and man's search for meaning, we're all in some way Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill, only to find ourselves at the bottom again. Camus' essay about Sisyphus concludes, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. And so one must imagine Sisyphus happy." Now, not everyone who reads Camus comes to the same conclusion. But what's lifted up in the film is that we all get to decide how we will respond to our circumstances. Dr. Stone's name also brings to mind another significant moment in literature created by existentialism's beloved author Jean-Paul Sartre. In Sartre's novel Nausea, the main character, Roquentin, is a classic existentialist hero who realizes that man is ultimately responsible for making his or her own meaning. Not God, or culture, or the church, or your family, or your best friend, or the television. We, individuals, are ultimately responsible for making their own meaning. Now, in a key scene in the novel, Roquentin stands on a beach alone, and he picks up a single stone, and realizing that he could have picked up any other stone on the beach, he becomes viscerally overwhelmed, both disgusted and elated at the combination of the randomness of that stone choice and his own power. Because he chose that particular stone, brought that particular stone into his focus, and picked that particular stone with his hand, he gave that stone value and meaning that otherwise it would not have had. And not the other hundreds of thousands of stones on the beach. And in that way, we mirror God. And so it is we who gives weight to every fact and experience, to every object and activity. It is we who strings together the series of events to write the story of our life as it is being lived. But what makes us pay attention to one thing and not another? Some things we in fact do turn our attention to, and some things demand our attention, take our attention, steal our attention. Some circumstances are within our control and others are not. Some circumstances we make happen, and some happen to us. Existentialism, like the film, is primarily concerned with how the individual human being comes to terms with their own existence, the most important meaning to discern in every person's life. And according to this philosophy, we are adrift in an infinite sea of possible choices of how to come to terms with our existence, an infinite number of possible modes of living with no secure anchor that guarantees certainty or confidence, even though some philosophies and churches and even our culture promise to have an answer. Now, not having certainty affects people in very different ways. In some, it produces despair and anguish. For many, the desire for certainty creates such despair that they actually trade their freedom like currency for simple solutions and temporary comfort. Even though no system can hold the complexity of our existence entirely. To others, uncertainty produces awe and wonder. But in the midst of our metaphysical dilemma, we will all likely face our own existential crisis, a point in which reason and rationality are not enough. We will all be forced to make a choice from that place of uncertainty despite not having all the information, with no clear path to a right decision, and we will have to choose anyway. That is an existential dilemma. But we can only come to a conscious decision after making what philosopher Soren Kierkegaard calls a leap of faith. A leap that is preceded by an awareness of our own freedom and the fact that we might choose wrongly. But nevertheless, we must make a choice if we are to truly live. Now, these kinds of untethered decisions happen regularly in our lives if we're not living a scripted life written by someone else. The decision to marry or not. In my own life's example, I got married at 22, my senior year of college. I did what I was expected to do, even though I knew that it was wrong for me. There are so many scripts written in our culture, but we must write the one that includes our life's dreams and desires. But there are a lot of rules. When we consider those untethered decisions to divorce or not, to have a child or not, to take a job or leave one, to bond out of jail or pay a lawyer, to take a deal or go to trial, to pay for medicine or food. In Gravity, Dr. Stone is our allegorical human being facing life. She has to decide during the film if she will participate in writing her own script or follow the one that's been written for her. The other astronaut, Matt Kowalski, is a live-in-the-moment kind of a guy. Through his interactions with Dr. Stone, his curiosity, his expression of gratitude and awe, and his stories, Kowalski appears to be present and grateful and full of life and love. And as you've probably seen from the trailer, Dr. Stone detaches from the space station while spacewalking, leaving her tumbling alone through space. Spinning out of control, she has to find her bearings. Through the miracle of film production, we tumble with her, untethered, in a scene which creates its own real nausea for those who are sensitive to it. Like a ballerina in pirouette, she must find a focal point to maintain control. Her GPS is broken. Her technology and her safety nets have all failed her. And she must make a choice to give up or to try to survive. She's spinning out of control in the vastness of space without any bearings. How do you know where you are when you are alone and disoriented? And the answer is almost always, I am in relationship to something else. Stone is lost, and there appears to be no way to stop her momentum. When our ground is only found in relationship to where we are, the question is, where do we place our focal point? What do we use as our guiding core value? We get to choose. For Stone, she had to search for the largest object in her midst before she could make sense of anything else. Where was the sun, the earth? But she was running out of air. If you've ever been thrown adrift in life by unforeseen circumstances, this feeling will be familiar to you. A feeling of being so overwhelmed that all we can do is the very next most important thing: breathe. Maybe even gulp down air instead of sip it. Maybe the next thing we can do is just open our eyes or put on our shoes. Sometimes just showing up dressed is a miracle. Stone finds her focal point, and Kowalski eventually retrieves Stone, and we have one lone tethered astronaut tethered to another, and they make their way towards the station. Communications with mission control are lost, but Stone and Kowalski keep jabbering on to each other and to themselves just in case someone can hear them. It is their prayer, in essence, an attempt to be seen and heard, to make their wishes known, despite whether anyone else is listening or not. Arriving at the space station, Stone's legs get tangled in parachute cords, and she is able to grab a strap on Kowalski's suit as they push and pull and fling each other away from and then onto the station, banging into one another and everything around them. Despite Stone's protests, Kowalski detaches himself from the tether to save her from drifting away with him, and she's pulled back towards the station. As he floats away to his death, he radios to her additional instructions and encouragement and tells her that she's going to have to learn to let go. Even in his departure, his last words are about how beautiful the Ganges looks in the sunlight. All things have a beginning and an ending. It is the nature of life. But why do we cling to things that harm us? What is the force that pulls and pushes us towards objects that we're trying to let go of? Gravity has no morality. Gravity just does what gravity does. And so it is up to us to distance ourselves far enough that the pull reduces until we are safe. To unhook ourselves from that which pulls us away from our chosen path or values. Even when it's someone or something that we have come to love. Even when it hurts. Stone manages to make it to a capsule, and she aligns it with a Chinese space station, but then discovers that the craft's thrusters have no fuel. After a brief communication via radio with an Inuit fisherman who does not understand her distress, Stone listens to him cooing a baby and singing a lullaby. And she resigns herself to being stranded. She begins to pray, though she admits that she really does not know how, asking for help. After her prayer is apparently unanswered, she is resigned to her own demise. She shuts down the oxygen supply of the cabin in order to commit a painless suicide. As Stone begins to lose consciousness, Kowalski appears outside the window and enters the capsule. As I, in the theater, have an almost very unculturally appropriate moment, screaming, I want to, at the screen, that her head is going to explode if he opens the capsule door. Because if he really is there, in a predictable, happy ending Hollywood moment sort of way, Stone had no helmet on. And so her head would have been exposed to space and pressure when he opened the airlock. But when she didn't explode, I immediately believed that she was hallucinating. Others, my wife included among them, believed that it was actually at this point in the film when she died. And that the rest of the film is her experience of the afterlife and reincarnation. It's an interesting concept that I will go into more in depth in the 10 o'clock service, if you would like to stay. What we see on film, however, is Kowalski in the capsule with her, scolding her for giving up, telling her to use the capsule's landing rockets to propel it toward the Chinese station, reminding her of what she already in essence knew in a last-ditch effort of survival. Stone is given new strength and the will to live on. She restores the flow of oxygen and uses the landing rockets to navigate towards the Chinese station. telling the now absent Kowalski to send her love to her daughter and to tell her she won't give up. At the 11:30 service, I'll be talking a little bit about how God answers her prayers. Stone enters the capsule just as it's falling back to Earth and starts to break up on the upper edge of the atmosphere. As the capsule re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, Stone hears mission control over the radio tracking the capsule. And in her final leap of faith, Dr. Stone says, "The way I see it, there's only two possible outcomes. Either I make it down there in one piece and I have one hell of a story to tell, or I burn up in the next 10 minutes. But either way, whichever way, no harm, no foul. Because no matter what, it's going to be one hell of a ride, and I'm ready." Fully awake to her circumstances as she plummets to the earth, she lands in a lake. Stone crawls to shore dramatically, emerging from the water, reminiscent of humanity's emergence from stardust through our evolution on the earth. She grasps the wet sand in her hands, the stuff from which we are made, and mutters the final word of the film, "Thanks." She takes her first shaky steps on land in the full gravity of the earth. The suspense of this film creates an experience of existential anxiety that asks us to question our own lives. How do we make meaning of our own existence? Do we live fully present to all of our choices? Or do we resign ourselves to the circumstances and the scripts written by others in our life? The film asks, what would we do if we were faced with complication after complication, disaster after disaster? Are we that resilient? Would we give up, or would we fight to the end to thrive, our eyes wide open for the ride, taking the biggest risks possible? We're asked to look deeply at what it means to be a human being, at the same time so powerful and yet so fragile. The film made me reflect on what will ground me in the face of difficulty. In the face of difficulty so great that I cannot even possibly conceive of what they might look like in this moment. Now, I've been privileged to walk with many in this church, atheists, humanists, theists of all sorts of theologies, in the face of the unthinkable, in the face of the death of a child, or an unanticipated diagnosis, the bottom of an addiction, freak accidents, mental breakdowns, floods, tornadoes, fires, and felonies. What will ground you in the face of the unimaginable? Now, one of the reasons why I love this film is that no matter your theological persuasion, the answer underlying the film's response to what grounds us in this moment, in those moments when we are untethered by circumstances, it's love and our connectedness to other human beings. Stone wants her story to be one of doing everything she can to thrive in the face of disaster for herself and for her daughter, for those who didn't make it home. She's grounded by her interaction with Kowalski, someone who is awake to the joy and the beauty as well as the struggle and the difficulty. She finds herself by telling him her story. She also finds herself through his challenge to let go of that which is not serving her. When we are untethered, we have a choice to stay isolated or to connect, to reach out or shut down. We can open our hearts and be vulnerable to another, give of ourselves, and in turn discover the very thing which will sustain us. This church offers an opportunity to do just that, regardless of your theology, to bind yourself in community to a diverse group of people. A group of people bound by their agreement to explore the freedom and the responsibility of choice in our search for truth. A community who challenges us to stay in relationship and care for more than just ourselves. Now, from a cosmological perspective, gravity causes dispersed matter to coalesce. It causes the separate to come together. And it is this very force which causes things that are already together to stay together. The gravity of our situation here on earth calls us to coalesce with other beings during our tumbling through life, to tether ourselves to a living, breathing, changing, vibrant, diverse community who can hold us accountable and, when necessary, hold us together. It's one hell of a ride. Are you ready?